So your adrenals and gonads, they make their own supply of cholesterol. So only in times of, kind of metabolic stress do they require more cholesterol, but they're generally actually getting that cholesterol from the HDL particles. It's not the ApoB containing particles. So no, you're not going to lower your testosterone too much taking a lipid-lowering therapy. And if you were for some reason, then use, whatever hormone replacement therapy within reason to keep your levels in optimal ranges. But oftentimes when people's when their testosterone's low, it's because they're drinking too much alcohol, they're not managing their stress, they're sleeping 5 hours a night, they have a poor diet, they don't work out. There's something in their environment that's telling the body, like, your body's under a lot of stress. We're going to shove a little energy down the stress hormones, and we're not going to worry so much about reproductive health right now.
Hello, and welcome to Legends of Longevity with Joseph Entz. I'm your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join me on this journey toward living a longer, healthier, and more vibrant life. This podcast is all about uncovering the secrets to longevity. Whether it's groundbreaking advancements in heart health, lifestyle tips to keep you thriving, or inspiring stories of people who've beat the odds, together we'll explore the tools, techniques, and mindset shifts that can help you unlock your fullest potential. Whether you're here to learn how to enhance your well-being, support your loved ones, or just stay ahead of the curve in health and wellness, you're in the right place. Let's empower each other to not only live longer, but live stronger. Today's a fun day. Welcome to Legends of Longevity. I'm with Dr. Michael Twyman, and he's a board-certified cardiologist, heart attack and prevention expert, and founder of Apollo Cardiology. Dr. Twyman's career has taken him from serving as a medical corps physician in the United States Navy to leading innovative approaches in cardiovascular and longevity medicine. Along the way, he earned his MBA, served as a department head of an internal medicine at a naval hospital, Beaufort, and ultimately shifted his focus from treating disease to preventing it. Known to many as Mito Mike or Red Light Doc, he combines conventional cardiology with functional medicine. He's not afraid to read a research report and tell you what really works. Mitochondrial optimization, circadian biology, metabolic health to help patients reduce cardiovascular risk. He's been in some documentaries on Inflame Me, sharing insights on inflammation and long-term health, which you can find on Netflix and Amazon. So welcome, Dr. Michael Twyman. I want to hear about this journey of yours, because not many cardiologists have that kind of a varied resume where you've been in hospitals, you've done the surgeries, you've done the procedures, you've had to do the budgeting for a department, and eventually start your own business. What a wild ride.
Yeah, and it's just, I feel like just getting started. But it's been a long journey. I mean, I knew I wanted to be a physician since I was in 4th grade. Didn't know what I wanted to do until you get through medical school and do some different rotations. Ultimately settled upon wanted to do cardiology. Just thought the heart was an amazing organ, and that no day was going to be the same. You took care of patients that'd be in the ICU, in the cath lab, emergency room, outpatient, imaging. It was just super exciting. But had to go through internal medicine first. So 3 years of doing internal medicine as a resident, and then I had a 4-year deployment essentially to the U.S. Navy. I was an internist for them, paying back my medical school obligation. They paid for the schooling. So fair trade, came out of school without any debt. But when I was in the Navy, I was the internal medicine department head at Naval Hospital Beaufort, South Carolina. So yes, did have to do some budgeting and such, and had really no experience on how to do that. So got my MBA when I was in the military. And after I served my 4 years, I went back into training at my kind of hometown university, St. Louis University. So 3 more years of cardiology training. Was an invasive cardiologist for many years, so in the cath lab doing procedures, but ultimately thought maybe it was a little bit better for me to spend some time figuring out how to prevent these heart attacks instead of just treat them. So getting to the root cause, as we say in the functional integrative world. So went on that journey back in probably 2012, 2013, and just keep falling down that rabbit hole further and further. And finally, in 2019, decided that I wanted to only focus on the preventive side of medicine and not the reactive side. So launched my own practice, Apollo Cardiology. I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, and I work with patients from all over the country and the world. We've had patients from Australia flying in to see us to get screened, and we screen them head to toe, looking at their 60,000 miles of blood vessels.
And you're also a sought-out speaker. You speak for several companies on nutraceuticals and the natural way to combat this disease.
Correct. And I always, tell people that, supplements are always secondary to what you're going to be doing lifestyle. But at times and places, there are things that can support the vessel health. And I'm always very transparent if I have any type of, financial disclosures. I usually tell people, like, I'm usually personally investing my own money in different supplements or gear or something. Nobody sends me stuff for free. I buy it with my own money, test it out. And if I like it, I talk about it.
Yeah, I was just saying not many people are that knowledgeable that people pay them to speak on a subject, and that it's kind of a hard level to get into medicine because every doc wants to be a speaker. But yeah, you walk it and talk it, and I appreciate that. So you photobiomodulation. My wife started going deaf, and I was getting used to it because she didn't hear me all the time, and I'm like, I was kind of, but she wanted her hearing back, so I'll let her. So she did shots in the ear with an ENT, went that whole route, still got worse, and then she got red light therapy, right on the side of the head, hour a night, and a week ago she tested normal. Wow. Now I'm looking around town, and there's these tanning bed looking companies where they sell some turbo-looking light beds, like $150,000 light beds, with programs for optimizing recovery, healing, whatever you want. Tell me more about this hot science that not many people know about.
So photobiomodulation, or red light therapy as it's colloquially known, it's been around since the 1960s. It was actually discovered in Hungary. They were trying to do some studies on some rats, and it was a cancer study. They were using red ruby lasers, and they were trying to assess, like, would the light therapy actually cause cancer? Much to their surprise, it didn't cause cancer, but it made the fur grow back on these rats that they were treating. And they're like, that's interesting. Later they figured out it was the mitochondria was the source where the light was getting absorbed and kicking off the hair growth or the fur growth in those mice. But most of the research was in Europe, Russia. Because of the Cold War, a lot of that literature wasn't translated until the 1990s, early 2000s, and a lot of it was kind of taken up by NASA. They used a lot of that technology on the space station, and they were using it mostly to try to see if they use certain different wavelengths of light to grow food. But then they've kind of come upon that red light therapy was helping with wound healing, so they are one of the bigger kind of developers of the LED technologies, which now have kind of bled down into the consumer grade devices. But photobiomodulation, I always tell people it's a supplement. It'll never replace full spectrum sunlight. But if you don't have access to full spectrum sunlight, or you just need to concentrate that light, these panels or devices or beds, they can help kind of charge up your mitochondria.
Yeah, so let's go on about the mitochondria and light. I read something recently, and I probably read it wrong, but our bodies emit light at a spectrum we don't see. And by feeding the mitochondria food, they produce light, and light is the energy and signaling molecule. Can you go over that for me?
So the mitochondria, colloquially, the power engines of the cell, they do a lot more than that. But if you want to think about it, think of the mitochondria as an engine. They're taking in electrons from the foods that you eat, or if you're grounding, or if you're outside in the sun and the water in your body is charge separating, those electrons flow through the mitochondria. And on the other side, the body makes ATP, water, carbon dioxide, and heat, infrared light. And the infrared light can also help kind of charge up the water that's being made in the mitochondria, the metabolic water. So your mitochondria are what really help the body kind of move through time and space. If you're not making energy, you're not alive. So the healthier your mitochondria, the better your health span. The healthier your mitochondria, the better you tend to age.
Huh. All right, so mitochondrial health, what are the top few things in there, and why does methylene blue so popular about that?
Sure. So, the best thing is focusing on getting your circadian rhythms in check. So the light that enters your eyes, the timing of your meals, and making sure that you sleep as well as you possibly can sleep. So everybody wants to focus on nutrition or exercise. And I'm not going to tell people those aren't important, but if you're not managing your sleep and your stress, you're still going to be taxing your mitochondria more than they can recover. So focus on your sleep first if that's not optimal, because that's when the mitochondria repair from any of the damage you threw at it earlier in the day. So methylene blue, it's a textile discovered in the late 1800s, and it was ultimately discovered that when they would inject it into animals, it was staining the brain blue. Later it was discovered the reason it was doing that is because the brain is heavily dense in mitochondria. So methylene blue was known as the the magic bullet, MB. So the cytochromes, if they're in the presence of without oxygen, the electrons don't flow well. So methylene blue is an electron recycler. It just helps the electrons flow more efficiently through the mitochondria. But that being said, this is not for everybody. The biohackers will use it, but you really need to be working with somebody who knows what they're doing, because you can definitely hurt yourself, potentially kill yourself with methylene blue.
I agree. I meet a lot of biohackers, and if you ask them what they're biohacking towards, you won't get a straight answer. I think the novelty of a lot of the cool stuff, and yeah, they swear by it. I've tried it. I didn't notice a huge difference. I thought I felt perkier, but And then the brain, I've read, this is a little bit off topic, but that neurologist, Jack Cruz, or neurosurgeon, whatever he is, said he used to give people methylene blue when their brains were swelling.
Correct.
Do you know anything about that, or why?
Well, that was in the case of, he was doing, brain surgeries, where he was doing craniotomies, and methylene blue can help with, the energy in the brain when there's an acute trauma. So it was trying to rescue brain tissue.
Incredible. Incredible. Okay, subject change. In your journey, what was the moment where you're like, I think I'm helping people, but I can do it better by doing Apollo Cardiology? And then what were the things you saw wrong with the system that kind of woke you or got you percolating in the brain?
I don't think there was just one specific patient that I could, frame it as, but in my years of being an invasive cardiologist, it was very rewarding to help people when they were very sick. But over time, I was going to more and more hospitals, taking care of sicker and sicker patients, and it just felt like you were kind of on a hamster wheel. You were never really curing heart disease. You were just treating the end stages of it. And so when I started getting more interested in kind of the preventive side of things, you start going to conferences, you start learning about other types of testing, and so you start learning how to read these advanced lipid panels and inflammatory markers, and you realize that heart disease or coronary disease is more than just, quote, high cholesterol, because we had plenty of people come to the cath lab who had, quote, normal cholesterol having heart attacks. So you just had that kind of cognitive dissonance, like, this can't be all cholesterol, there has to be something more. And then you go to the conferences and you start hearing about technologies like the endopath that tests nitric oxide availability from the arteries. You find out, about carotid intimal medial thickness testing. You knew about carotid duplex scans, but you never thought about the intima as a measurement. Learned about that when I was doing kind of some functional medicine training. And so you just keep adding to the kind of armamentarium to try to find vascular disease earlier and earlier before the end stage where people are presenting. So I used to kind of say, like, I don't really, think of people as like Humpty Dumpty, but it's sort of like people falling off the wall and they're severely damaged. It's really rewarding to help them, but maybe we keep them up on the wall. We show them how to, mitigate their life stress, how to get them to sleep better. Yes, nutrition is important, but it's not the be-all, end-all. And so it's really about trying to treat the person as an individual and figuring out the root cause of why that person's at risk of having a heart attack or stroke.
Fascinating. And then, okay, a couple different points then. When did you realize the cholesterol narrative is a little oversold?
I wouldn't say that it's oversold. I just don't think that it's myopically the only thing that's important. So probably for 10 years, once you actually start understanding that, you have to actually measure the lipoproteins, the number of transporters, that's when you start thinking like there has to be more than just one number you're looking at on the lab test. And so once you start measuring particle number, then you really start understanding, is this something that is, lifestyle can change? Is it a nutrition thing that the person is doing that's causing that? Or is this really genetic? And then get on with it. Talk to the patient about, this is the health of your arteries. If you want to lower your risk, you may have to address your lipoproteins. If you can do it with lifestyle, outstanding. But if not, are you open to using different pharmaceuticals or nutraceuticals? And then just marrying that to the story said, yes, the lipids are important, but we also have to talk about nitric oxide. We also have to talk about inflammation. I learned from people that there's maybe 300 to 400 different things that are damaging the arteries. And if you only focus on blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, smoking, and obesity, you miss 395 other things.
Amen. I mean, there's a holistic answer for sure. So cholesterol, how about sugar? When were you thinking this sugar is a bigger problem than I was told growing up?
I mean, I think I went through the phases of like understanding that, this American diet is not going to be healthy. But the key is when you start getting to more to like thinking about, mitochondrial medicine or quantum biology, you realize that food is just an electromagnetic barcode for sunlight. So if you're eating real food, the sunlight through photosynthesis grew a plant, and then you're eating that plant, and your mitochondria's job is to reverse that and turn that back into energy through the electrons going through your mitochondria. Or you're eating the animal that ate the plant, and then you're getting the electrons from the animal's fat to go through your mitochondria. So it's all about electrons from the food, and that's why the food story is somewhat overcooked for some people. Some people have extremely healthy mitochondria. They can probably tolerate more carbohydrates that have more electrons. But if they have really bad mitochondria, they may not be able to. But people who tend to have these issues where their blood sugars are fluctuating up, down, that high fluctuation and the high insulin release that occurs, that is directly toxic to the glycocalyx, which is the protective gel coat for the endothelium. If the gel coat is getting damaged, you've kind of opened up the doors to where you're more likely to develop plaque than not. So sugar is one of the things that, if it's done to excess, is going to damage the glycocalyx.
Yeah, sugar's a treat, not a food group. Sorry, you blew my mind there for a second. I look for things to be grateful for in my life, and you kind of rephrased the sun again for me. Like, outside of salt and magnesium and minerals, everything we eat is grown by the sun. Like, there's no other food on earth unless the sun grew it. And I don't know why that struck me as so profound for a minute there, but that was it. And then you're right, the glycocalyx, that lining of the arteries, it does work at a quantum level. I mean, you're at the 5 nanometer for height. That's as tall as they get, I'm told. Even if they're 10 nanometers, that's still, you can't see it. That's the level of the microchips that we're manufacturing, where they're talking about the leak, the quantum leak from the electricity. And anyways, your blood's pumping along, and these little hairs are super unusually slippery, because if you do the math on the heart, it doesn't have enough power to pump through, 100,000 miles of vessels or 60, whatever, but it's a lot. And those little hairs are negatively charged, and they just keep that blood pushing, so slippery. And if it's not perfect, you've got these inflammatory molecules in your blood. Whatever one you want to make an enemy, I'm your man. But they come up the carotid and they just irritate the lining. And you could use a metaphor like sugar is sandpapery and too much insulin is sticky. And it's keeping your arteries clean with diet is the hardest thing to do. But you can supplement. You're right, the American SAD diet, or standard American diet, you need to think more like your grandfather ate or your grandparents. And there's just too much. Sugar's a preservative, which is in the food that you probably think is safer. Anyways, I totally agree, man. Keep preaching.
Yeah, but I'm sorry. I'm going to go on a quick tangent. Is that, again, I talk to patients all day long, and I would tell them nutrition is important, but you're always going to get the antidotes of like, my grandma ate junk, and I'll give you that antidote. I had a great grandmother. She was born in 1893. She died in the year 2000 at 106 years old. I knew her until I was in my mid-20s. I gave her eulogy at her funeral. She lived alone until she was 100 years old. She did not take any medications. She never exercised a day in her life, probably. She ate the standard American diet. She ate hot dogs and Post Toasties and Diet Coke. She didn't smoke, okay? But she wasn't a picture of health from a nutrition standpoint. So it tended to be that she had good mitochondria, because she can make energy to get to 106, but she had, surprise, she had some good genes. She had loss of function PCSK9, so her lipids were extremely low her entire life. This is what the drug companies developed the PCSK9 inhibitors off of people like my great-grandmother. So Repatha, Praluent, those medicines, those mimic what my grandmother had natively. So her ApoB was probably 30 to 40 her entire life. She never got atherosclerosis. So there's always going to be those one-off type of people. And so I tell them, like, you have to test, don't guess, what is the health of your arteries, your endothelium, your intimal thickness, your calcium score test, or your CT angio. If you have plaque, figure out what's driving that plaque. Sometimes it is nutrition, but there's sometimes the people who can eat the hot dogs and they're going to make it to 100 plus years old.
That's exactly right. I love it when people come up with a snapshot because they want to improve. And a snapshot's, this is where you were at this moment in time. And with the arteries, it's nice because you can see it, you can see the plaque. And calcium score, not so much. It's a great test for catching sick people. And tell me if I'm wrong, Doc. But if you find out your score is 100, we're making up a number, and you and your patient come up with great therapy and you work super hard and the patient changes it, and a year later their score is double, you can't promise him it wasn't as a result of their work or if it's just naturally getting worse. It's really hard to tease that apart. The advanced tests, like clearly, oh, they do beautiful work, kind of mapping it out, and they give you graphics, so you do have a snapshot there, but the testing you get, knowing where you are and where you want to go is the way to do it. And you can tune for each part of the anatomy. Like you could tune up just for the intima, you could tune up just for cholesterol, for mitochondria, but they all seem to kind of fall into a holistic whole if you're doing it right. Would you agree? Word. I wanted to combat you a little bit on cholesterol. That centenarian study came out where everybody over 100 years old who was still with it, their cholesterol was sky high. And for a lot of docs, that put the whole cholesterol narrative on their heels. How would you round that out or finish that story?
Well, I just gave the example. I had a grandmother make it to 106 with low cholesterol her entire life. So you can kind of cherry pick some of the data sometimes.
Oh, so you're saying that may be a survivor bias type thing.
Right. Correct. And so they're just like, they're 100 years old. Roger that. Whatever they did, they probably had ApoC3 genes. They had loss of function PCSK9 genes. They had some other protective mechanism that allowed them to have, quote, high cholesterol their whole life. Cholesterol, for those that don't understand, is a critical molecule that you're not going to be alive without having it. So all your cells, minus the red blood cells, are making their own supply of cholesterol. You need it to make your cell membranes, you make your bile acids, your hormones from it. But the fun fact is, most of your cholesterol in your bloodstream, it's actually being transported by your red blood cells, not the lipoproteins. So if cholesterol was so bad for you, it wouldn't be in your system. You have to have it. The problem is when the cholesterol crystallizes in the intimal lining and is a nidus for more and more discovery from the macrophages and kicks off this immune response where more and more plaque develops in the arteries. My opinion, not yet fact, is that if you have a healthy glycocalyx, healthy endothelium, optimal nitric oxide, that acts more like a force field. That keeps the arteries slick. Think of your eyes, the white of your eyes, that's the consistency of the glycocalyx. Or think of a fish coming out of water that's slimy. If that coating is healthy, that coating is heavily structured water. That structured water is highly negatively charged and it repels things. So think of a maglev train. The lipoproteins, they are negatively charged. Negative repels negative like a magnet. So if the glycocalyx is healthy, the lipoproteins, which are transporting the triglycerides and vitamins and phospholipids, and yes, sometimes a little bit of cholesterol through your bloodstream, it just slides by and goes to where it's supposed to go and drops off its cargo. And then it makes its return trip back to the liver. The problem is when it makes the detour and gets trapped in the intimal lining. Not that there's, quote, high cholesterol.
Yeah, having that scratchy cholesterol, the deposition cholesterol. Yeah, okay. Blood pressure is the biggest indicator for heart attack and stroke, a lot of people say. And nitric oxide won some science awards in '98, I think it was the Nobel Prize. And we have guys like Nathan Bryant out there, who was a PhD, scrappy dude, good dude as far as I can tell. He was the guy who kind of brought beet powder and Neo 40 to the market, as I understand it. And he's been working on nitric oxide, and I'm hearing docs saying, I'm using this to reduce or get rid of blood pressure medication, making sure people are topped off with their nitric oxide. If I was a beginner, how would you explain this, and what results have you seen by using products like that?
So I exclusively check for endothelial dysfunction in my practice. If you have low nitric oxide, you very likely will have stiff arteries, and you may or may not have elevated blood pressure. But if you have endothelial dysfunction, where the arteries aren't releasing sufficient nitric oxide, that's the first step in developing plaque in your arteries. So if you have elevated blood pressure at home, and essentially anything over 120/80 is elevated, optimal is like 115/75 if you're not on medications. But if you're seeing these consistently 140/90s at home on multiple occasions, you need to get checked out and figure out why your blood pressure is elevated. High blood pressure is the silent killer. You generally don't have any symptoms with it, but your arteries are taking a pounding with those higher pressures. So high blood pressure, I tell people, like, it'll have an ICD-10 code and is a, quote, disease, but it's a response to something in your environment. your arteries don't necessarily want to be constricted. So you got to figure out, okay, what's causing the constriction? Is it a lack of nitric oxide? Is it inflammation? Is it high stress? This is where, the white coat hypertension people come in. I'm only high when I'm at the office. Well, that's due to all the adrenaline and, stress hormones your body has. Are you not stressed anywhere else in your life? If you are, your blood pressure is high at that time too. So nitric oxide can be tested, through various means, but if you have high blood pressure, start the process of checking it. So nitric oxide, how is it produced? Well, when blood flows across your arteries, the glycocalyx senses that shear stress, the underlying endothelium then secretes nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a short-lived signaling molecule. It's a gas. It's around for a few milliseconds. But that molecule kicks off a reaction that causes the smooth muscle in the artery wall to relax, so the blood vessels get larger. That improves flow, so that can hit blood pressure normal. After about the age of 40, the enzyme that converts arginine to citrulline doesn't work as well, so you make less and less nitric oxide as blood flows across your arteries. This is one of the reasons why exercise is so important, because you're forcing blood across the arteries and trying to teach it to make more nitric oxide. But there's backup pathways. So this is oral pathway. So if you eat the beet powders or eating dark green leafies, spinach, kale, arugula, the nitrates in those compounds will get broken down in the saliva if you have nitrate-reducing bacteria. So this is the reason why Dr. Brian talks about really should be careful or avoid using antiseptic mouthwash. If you destroy all the good bacteria in your mouth, then you're not going to be able to make nitric oxide through this pathway. Once you swallow the nitrates that have been converted to nitrites, there's another reaction that happens in the stomach, but you require stomach acid for that process to happen. Then your body makes nitric oxide. If you block your stomach acid, you're going to stop that process from happening. So people taking proton pump inhibitors and antacids, they're probably going to have lower nitric oxide because of that pathway being broken. But there's another pathway, is that when you're outside in the sun and you're exposed to UVA wavelengths of light, which for the most part is when your skin feels warm, the UVA spectrum is outside, the nitric oxide is liberated from the nitrate pools in your skin. So this is part of why people turn kind of pink or erythematous out in the sun, is their blood vessels are dilating because nitric oxide is getting liberated.
Well done. Let me pick that apart a little bit. There's ways to develop your nitric oxide. But if you eat food to do it, it may take a 2 or 3 pass digestive process to make it happen. And even then, not everybody's got all the enzymes to do it. So supplementation's not a bad idea. And you said smooth muscle stuff. Viagra works on this organ, correct?
Correct. And so, sildenafil or Viagra, that was the first phosphodiesterase inhibitor to hit the market. They were initially studying it for blood pressure and also pulmonary hypertension, high blood pressure in the lungs. But in the studies, they realized that men were having more erections, and they thought, hey, there's probably more money to be marketed there than to treat pulmonary hypertension. So it went down that pathway and became an extremely popular pharmaceutical for the company. But those medications do not produce nitric oxide. You have to produce the nitric oxide first, and then these medicines basically keep it around longer. So I often talk with patients, is like, you have to fill the funnel up with nitric oxide, and then the Viagra type medications keep it around longer so that it can work. So when you have sufficient nitric oxides to the small blood vessels to the sexual organs, the blood vessels dilate and blood flow goes to those organs, and the people are able to maintain an erection or clitoral enlargement if it's a woman. So these medicines very beneficial for people who have sexual issues, no problem there, but I often tell people, it's the canary in the coal mine. If you're using these medications, it's usually a sign you don't have sufficient nitric oxide. If you don't have sufficient nitric oxide, you could be at more risk of having advanced vascular disease. So test, don't guess. Go get yourself a carotid scan, get a calcium score, CT angiogram, get something that looks at your coronary arteries and carotid arteries.
Fascinating. And so nitric oxide is like a newer category in the last 25 years. It's been developing and building. And first of all, let me just say, Calroy has a great product that has aged garlic in it, the Vascanox, that a lot of men like taking, a lot of women too, but that helps a lot. But that has aged garlic in it, there's a lot of research studies saying that aged garlic helps the nitric oxide stay in your bloodstream longer.
It also helps with hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is another vasodilatory gas, so it's kind of a combination technology. So Vascanox also has a longer duration of action. It lasts a little over 24 hours, so it's a once-a-day administration. So some people find that more convenient, and as long as it's working well for them, oftentimes you just maintain that. If it's controlling their arterial stiffness, their blood pressure, don't change things. But some people, if they're not making sufficient nitric oxide through the oral pathway, you have to give them one of the oral disintegrating lozenges so the nitric oxide gas actually gets released in that area. And so some companies are also working on different kind of probiotic gums that may try to kind of repopulate the good bacteria in the saliva.
All right, let's go back to oral biome for a second. When a research study comes out and it's so unique that you're like, all right, how does that data point fit in? And the study about using mouthwash quadruples or doubles your risk of heart attack or diabetes it was. And the way you just described, the bacteria in your mouth breaks down a lot of this nitric acid and starts the whole process. I think starches are half digested in the mouth as well. So gut biome is going to be a huge hot science in the future. I'm sure you're going to hear people talk about their gut biome as if they were talking about an English garden and how they cultivate it and feed it and supplement it. What are you seeing? Because we just spent 10 minutes talking about supplements that are super powerful, and people are getting great results off of them.
Yeah, I mean, much like almost anything in medicine, do no harm, but oftentimes it's about withdrawing the things that's keeping people from being optimal. Supplements, of course, use them when you need them, but sometimes it's as easy as can you stop using antiseptic mouthwash? Can we get you outside in the sun so that the nitric oxide can be liberated? Can we get out there and get your heart rate up, get nitric oxide to be produced on your arteries? Can you do it with a lifestyle intervention first? And if not, then supplement appropriately or add pharmaceuticals on. But the gut microbiome, the oral microbiome, yes, it's kind of, let's just say, bleeding edge to kind of think about how you're actually going to mitigate it. But I think people overestimate how diverse and how much these kind of gut microbiome and oral microbiome, they're really going to be sensitive to your circadian biology as well. So the way I was taught with this is that your light informs your skin and your skin informs your gut. So if your gut doesn't work well, you're probably not getting appropriate light signals through your eyes or on your skin. So start there first.
That's pretty good. So how does someone, if they make all these changes, let's scrap that question. What are your top 5 supplements, or not supplements, but natural remedies like bergamot, things that people don't usually think about, or just clever stuff that you think, like, hey, most of you all are low on magnesium and you'll sleep better and you'll digest better. What are yours that most people are low on? Vitamin D? True.
And I will talk about it, but I always tell people it's you came out of the womb not needing all these things. So you need to look at your environment first. Why are you, quote, sick? There's something in your environment that you're probably missing, or your mitochondria are not being well managed. Then go to looking at blood testing if you like, figure out is there an actual deficiency, supplement if need be. But no, there's no blanket, everybody should take these 5 things. It's test, don't guess. But yes, very many people are deficient in magnesium. Soil's less, optimized for magnesium concentration. And there's 300 to 400 different reactions in the body that require magnesium. So people have muscle cramps, they can't sleep well, they have, constipation, they got migraines, they're probably magnesium deficient. Seems reasonable. Use some magnesium in different chelates. Omega-3s, extremely important. Your brain requires, DHA for the neurons. So you're ideally eating seafood 3 to 4 times a week. If you can't, because you just don't have access to it or just don't like it, you may benefit from supplementation. But may is the key word. Omega-3s through the diet are in the right package that Mother Nature put together. If something's been blended, put in a capsule, and then you're putting it back into your body, who knows how the quantum bonds are actually going to be working in that case. It may work, may not. So don't default to supplementation for omega-3s unless you just absolutely can't do it through nature's way of eating it directly. Saying about bergamot, bergamot's kind of like a weak statin. It's an HMG-CoreDuctase inhibitor. So for people who maybe don't have severe dyslipidemia and they want to try a supplement, bergamot is generally safe. But with anything, I tell people, like, you have a data point, you do an intervention, you retest, usually 3 to 4 months later, did it, quote, work? If you and your provider are happy with the results, then maybe stay the course. But oftentimes I find that bergamot is just not that potent, so you're usually going to be layering something else on to it at that time.
Well done. Those are good. Thank you. All right, where are you at on statins? A lot of docs are trying to back away from it, or their patient population doesn't want them.
It's one of the most common questions I get in my practice, and I tell people always they are tools. There are people who are potentially good candidates, and there's people who are not very good candidates to utilize them. So measure the risk of the person by some type of testing. So I think where people kind of have some challenges is that for secondary prevention, the world of general cardiologists, invasive cardiologists, this is somewhat of a moot point. Everybody they see is high risk. Statins should be at least considered in many of those patients. Not everybody can tolerate them. That's the crux. I've definitely seen many patients who have muscle symptoms, muscle cramps, don't feel well on them. Okay, you don't tolerate that tool, but that doesn't discount that maybe you want to treat your dyslipidemia. Use a different tool. Use ezetimibe, use Repatha, use Nexletol, use something else. Quick side note, Verve 102 was just announced a week or two ago. It's gene editing where they go in there and they edit the PCSK9 gene. You basically turn the gene off at the liver. The LDL receptors just keep clearing cholesterol from the circulation. Not a statin. It's basically going to mimic what my great-grandmother had. Now you permanently have cleared lipoproteins. So I understand people's concerns that I can't tolerate them, but they are tools for the people who've had high-risk events. If you've had a heart attack, stroke, stents, bypass, and you're hoping not to have that happen again, you should probably consider it, because there's good data that the lower your ApoB is in those people, the less likely you'll have another event. But I don't think you should stop there, because if you don't address the glycocalyx, the endothelium, the inflammation, you can have, quote, low lipoproteins and still end up in the cath lab. That was one of my aha moments many years ago, is that we'd see patients come in all the time with normal cholesterol. So it isn't always a cholesterol story. Statins are one of the tools that, quote, lower cholesterol, but the statins also have an effect at stabilizing plaque. Takes that soft plaque that's more prone to rupture and cause a heart attack, turns it more fibrotic and calcified, and statins also lower inflammation. So sometimes there is a benefit for them. But I don't always agree with going high to begin with. Sometimes lower is better. Start slow and work up. One of the companies, Boston Heart Diagnostics, has a test called the cholesterol balance test. It tells you how much composterol and desmosterol the liver is producing. If you're producing high levels of sterols in your liver, statins tend to work better for those individuals. So you can tailor the drug to that individual. And if they're very sensitive, you can do genetic testing to figure out, do they have genes that make it more likely they're going to have muscle symptoms. And in those cases, then maybe you wouldn't start with the statin. Or if you would, maybe you're going to use it twice a week. But you're going to work with the patient to say, this is why we're doing this, and this is going to be the follow-up test to say it's working for you or not.
Yeah, give the patient the outcome or the objective you're looking for. Why does that seem refreshing? So right now in medicine, if you go to a cardiologist, like you said, they'll patch you up and put you back together again pretty good, like better than any other country in the world. But once you're patched up, I mean, where do people look for a prevention program? Like, because there's not many CPT codes for it. It's not generally built into the system to prevent the next one. The way the money works, if you follow the money is they're waiting for you to have another event and they'll patch you up again, because there's just no prevention built into the system. You're combating that. Tell me how you're doing that.
So when I was an internist, I was basically trying to be a preventative, internist at that point. I wouldn't use a cardiologist because I didn't do the training, but essentially a primary care doctor should be on the front lines of trying to mitigate this risk, because they're the person that's seeing the patient the most often. Most people are seeing a cardiologist once or twice a year, but you might see your primary doctor more than once a year. And the primary doctor is the quarterback. When I was an internist, my job was basically to try to keep people away from the cardiologist. I'd only send them to the cardiologist if I needed a procedure that I couldn't take care of. So I tried to aggressively manage people's blood pressure, lipids. I didn't know as much as I did now with them, but I was trying to do what I could with the knowledge I had. So I think it's going to go back to being more in the kind of the primary care sphere. I think that's where the patients are going to get first crack at this lifestyle medicine. It's not going to flow from the upstream cardiologists. They're honestly just too busy taking care of the super sick patients. And so when I was still in the system, and I started being more interested in this, I was, quote, punished by the system because I wasn't doing as many heart catheterizations or hospital stress tests. I wanted to focus on talking about lifestyle and educating them about, nitric oxide and sleep. And that is time. It takes time to educate people on that. One of the reasons why I enjoy doing podcasts, because I can talk to somebody for an hour, have a great conversation, and tens of hundreds of thousands of people can hear this conversation. And if I can't work with them, and I'm happy to work with people, still, of course, seeing new patients, but at least they hear this, it perks them up and says, maybe I need to ask better questions of my current doctor. And if your current doctor can't answer that, then maybe that's time to start thinking about looking for another doctor who's going to be your ally. They need to be your Sherpa to kind of guide you on your kind of journey for health.
Yeah, Health Sherpa, man. I've been using that. That's the best. Yes, Health Sherpa is like, you know where you want to go. You need somebody to help you get there. And knowing, right now, medicine, there's more flavors of medicine right now with functional medicine, preventative medicine, naturopaths, full pharma, and the whole spectrum's there. And finding the doc that'll fit the way you want to do it. I mean, most of these flavors can get you there or pretty close to what your objective is. And speaking of new objectives, you mentioned Repatha, and I've seen results on that were so good, they actually scared me. This guy reduced his intima from 1.2 millimeters to 0.6, like halved it in a year, and his plaque shrunk up pretty small, just a little flexible on the wall. What are you seeing? What are your, Repatha, is it too good? And then I want to get into peptides.
Sure. So, the PCSK9 inhibitors, they're very effective lipid modulating medications. Most of the medications are twice a month injections. They do have some monthly versions, and then there's one that is twice a year, and there's going to be a daily oral form coming out within the next year or two. But the PCSK9 inhibitors, they work by helping the liver clear cholesterol from the circulation. So the liver makes something called an LDL receptor. I tell patients, think of it as like a docking station. The docking station's grabbing your cholesterol particles out of the circulation, brings it into the liver, and then the liver breaks it down and helps your body get rid of it. But some people just don't make a lot of those docking stations, or when they make the docking station, maybe it only works for a few hours. It's kind of breaking down too soon. It breaks down because PCSK9 breaks down that receptor. If you block that enzyme, the receptor just keeps basically staying out longer. The docking station just keeps clearing cholesterol particles from the circulation. So that's what my grandmother had. She just had very good functioning LDL receptors. So Repatha tries to mimic that. So those medications, because they're so effective, they can lower LDL particles or ApoB containing particles, 40, 50, I've seen this much as 60% reductions in some patients. So if you lower people's ApoB to 50, 40, there's data that plaque definitely can start to shrink at that stage. And so that's where I get into the, test, don't guess philosophy, is that, if you don't want to take a stand for whatever reason, or you don't tolerate it, your arteries don't lie. If you have an intima shrinking, you have a clearly scanned showing soft lipid-rich core shrinking, one of the things is you've had low lipoproteins for a while, because basically think about it, it's like you stop doing the damage to the arteries, and then the body, who has a lot of wisdom, gets to work at trying to fix that damage and shrink and delipidate that plaque. So yes, I've seen some of the literature too, that particularly with Repatha, that lipid-rich core is shrinking more significantly than just using statins alone. So again, if you don't prefer to take a statin, those are PCSK9 options are pretty good options. There's very minimal side effect profile from what I can see. It's mostly injection site irritation. But again, I'm somewhat biased because I have family members who have the gene that basically mimics Repatha. So I didn't see that there would be a real harm to have, quote, low ApoB for your entire life. I saw a woman live to 106 with basically Repatha since she was born.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you. You cleared that up. You're right. The docking stations is the metaphor I needed. And aren't those LDLs used for hormones and everything else? I mean, do people have lower testosterone or anything once those are engaged or used?
So your adrenals and gonads, they make their own supply of cholesterol. So only in times of, kind of metabolic stress do they require more cholesterol, but they're generally actually getting that cholesterol from the HDL particles. It's not the ApoB containing particles. So no, you're not going to lower your testosterone too much taking a lipid-lowering therapy. And if you were for some reason, then use whatever hormone replacement therapy within reason to keep your levels in optimal ranges. But oftentimes when people's lipids when their testosterone's low, it's because they're drinking too much alcohol, they're not managing their stress, they're sleeping 5 hours a night, they have a poor diet, they don't work out. There's something in their environment that's telling their body like, your body's under a lot of stress. We're going to shove a little energy down the stress hormones, and we're not going to worry so much about reproductive health right now.
Amazing. It's befuddling to me because it's down 40% in the gen pop, like in the last 40 years. And I can't believe we're all just that sedentary.
It's multifactorial. There's not just one thing that's having an effect on that, but
yeah, for sure. Before we get into peptides, niacin. I spent a big part of my career, and I watched companies come and go, and one of them was Niaspan. It was an extended release niacin, and this was an education for me to see how powerful marketing is in medicine. And they got funding, they got 100 sales reps around the country, they were all educated really well, they had convincing lines, and for about 10, 15 years, they sold the crap out of this stuff, saying it reduced heart attacks and strokes. They had really good data on HDL, that it raised the HDL 7 points a year, no upper limit, keep using it every year. And that company, the product went off a patent, and you'd never know that niacin was a thing in heart attack and stroke prevention for a long time. So it's interesting to me to see the narrative change with sales reps pushing narratives. A, where are you at on niacin now? And two, pontificate about the effect sales reps have or the money in medicine and how that influences physicians' decisions.
So for niacin, there was literature in the 1980s, prior to statins being more popular, that there was some benefit in bypass patients, I believe. So there was some at least theoretical, but once more potent agents came out, niacin got, for the most part, relegated to patients who had very high triglycerides. Later, there was the theory of like raising HDL may be beneficial, but through the majority of the previous CETP inhibitor trials, raising HDL was neutral at best, harmful at worst. People died more if you start messing with their HDL because it's a lot about the HDL function more than it is the total number of HDL. So you haven't heard me once say HDL is good cholesterol. Cholesterol is cholesterol. They're just different transporters. But to date, raising HDL through nutraceutical or pharmaceutical means hasn't really panned out to reduce cardiac events. And that's all that the patient really cares about. They don't really care about what their labs look like. They care if they're getting their chest cracked open or if they're getting a stent. So niacin, for the most part, is relegated to some more niche cases now. Some people for elevated lipoproteinase still believe in that the benefit of lowering LPA with niacin is helpful. My experience, I don't see that literature being that strong. I think you have to lower LPA, 95% before you're going to see a reduced outcome. So I don't personally recommend niacin for patients with LPA. If they want to take it, I don't think it's high risk, but I don't think it's super useful. And I think more people are using it right now is probably more for kind of like the NAD kind of story, like, they're using NR, NMN, and maybe they're using some niacin to try to support NAD. So that's that story. To the kind of the pharmaceutical reps, nutraceutical reps, I'm a free market capitalist. I have a private practice, but it's one of those things where it's like everybody has something to sell, and you want to know what is their incentive. My incentive is to educate you. If you want to work with me one-on-one, you can hire me, and I'll be your Sherpa. But I'm pretty transparent. Like, I'm not trying to sell people any supplements with white label that have my name on it and that the only thing that works is Dr. Twyman's XYZ. All I'm selling is my time and my education, that I know these things through my experience for the past 20 years being a doctor. So back to the stories, like a rep has something they want to sell. Okay, personally, I don't need their information. Since I've had my own practice, I don't allow any drug reps or pharmaceutical reps to come to my practice. I don't take their meals. I don't take their pens. If you go to the Sunshine Act website, which I recommend any patient do, it's a government website. You can type in the name of your doctor or provider, and you can see how much money that they received from pharmaceutical companies for speaking fees or other reasons. You plug my name in there, you're going to see $0 for the past 7-8 years. When I was a resident or fellow, because they were basically drug rep sponsored meals for lunches for the residents, your name was always on those lists. I couldn't opt out at that point. But when I could, I did. So I don't get my information from drug reps. If I am interested in a topic, I'm going to do my own research. I'm going to go to my own conferences. I'm going to use my own AI deep research agents to find out about, okay, gene editing for lipids. I'm not going to wait for a drug rep to come to me and say, like, have you heard about the new statin? Like, I'll be like, yes, and I'm not going to listen to your explanation. I have pros and cons that I've done my own research for.
Fascinating. Because the pharma reps kind of inform the industry, because unless a doc's passionate and buys education on a subject or goes bird dogging, they're not going to get new information but through the pharma reps. And it's just interesting to see how different docs respond, different flavors of medicine. Some docs it's perfect and that's just how they stay updated, but precious few providers, I'm finding, do a lot of free reading on the industry. They just kind of go off because what they taught wasn't wrong, but there's a million ways to optimize.
Correct. And I don't even know, like, how much stuff did I learn in medical school? Is it still, actionable? A lot is, but some of it's completely 180 reversed. And so I think the best thing is just having a curious mind and a way to understand literature and just experience and looking at data and saying, like, does this make sense? Because what you might have believed 5 years ago is not what you believe now. And then you just kind of move with the new paradigm. So yes, that's one of the reasons I really love cardiology, is that it is a very fast-moving kind of specialty. Like, it's not standing still. Good. Heart disease is still the number one thing that kills people. We should be spending more time talking about these topics, not less. And when heart disease is an orphan disease, then tackle the next disease. So I'm not saying cancer's not important, but if you don't stop heart disease, what are we doing here?
Yeah, it's the biggest disease. It's the most easily preventable. I totally agree. Natto kinase, serrapeptase, lumbrokinase, a lot of products have promised, or at least have research, that they can shrink the plaque. A lot of the statins, rosuvastatin, they've got images showing plaque shrinking over time. What are the products you're aware of? Because I'm the guy that measures it, and I don't see any one product that crushes it all the time. I've seen some miracles here and there. I've seen good stabilization on a lot of products, and I can't tell if it's from the patient's changing diet or the product. But tell me your thoughts on this.
So I think it generally comes down to three big levers, and that's what I teach the patients is optimize the nitric oxide pathways, remove the things that are breaking it, remove high homocysteine, high uric acid, high insulin, get rid of those things if you can. If you can't, then support the person through whatever nutraceutical product works for them. Look at all the oxidative stress and inflammatory markers that you have access to. Put out the fires, put out the rusting. Then look what's left over. They have severe dyslipidemia, treat it with whatever tool you and the patient are agreeable to trying to utilize, lower the risk. That's kind of the cocktail I see where you start seeing plaque stop building up. As you understand, like, plaque can reverse. People sometimes are surprised to hear that. First thing is you got to find it. Most people aren't looking for plaque until, my chest hurts, or I can't, walk up the stairs anymore. That's why they're showing up to a cardiologist for a stress test. You're almost too late. You also want to go looking when you don't have symptoms. People will get mammograms when they're 40. They're starting to get colonoscopies when they're 40. Why don't you go check out your heart? Make sure you're not at a high risk type of event over the next 10 years. Find it first. Use the root cause analysis, how you're going to find it, what's causing the plaque, come up with a plan to try to stabilize it, and repeat. I always tell patients, it's a win if you repeat your carotid scan and it's not changing. Whatever you're doing is working. If you see it regressing, then you're winning. It doesn't always happen that it regresses, but I have seen it, and it is possible. But you have to stop doing the damage first. As for the kind of the Natto, serrapeptase, lumbrokinase, they may work, but typically I just tell people, like, if you have really high fibrinogen on your blood test and you don't have a lot of inflammation, maybe it's worthwhile. Think of it as like it's going to help your blood be more like red wine, less like ketchup. But to my reading, the studies that everybody on the internet's right now talking about are these Chinese studies using very high dose natto kinase. And the study was a observational study, not randomized, not controlled. And there's some big kind of red flags, is that the dose was 5 times higher than is usually used. It was a product from a company that was doing the studies. 5 of the investigators in the study owned stock in the company that they were using their drug or their supplement, and the CIMTs, from my understanding, were not blinded to the people who were giving the supplement. So there's a lot of incentive to see plaque better on those studies. So if it was completely randomized and that was the result, that would be amazing that plaque regressed that much. That would be a groundbreaking, better than anything out there type of story. Well, some other university or some other research organization should be able to repeat that study with similar dosing, similar technology, and show, yep, that is repeatable. If it's repeatable and the risk is low, maybe consider it. But there's definitely some case reports too of intracerebral hemorrhages, bleeding in your brain with these supplements on board if people are taking standard aspirin, which aspirin is very much more potent at blocking your platelets. So nutraceuticals have their role, but there can be interactions with other things, so you've got to know what you're doing. So this is not for the biohackers just to pop pills. If you don't know what you're doing, you can definitely kill yourself.
Yeah, the Natto does have a blood thinning, right? Like, if you should tell your doctor if you're taking it before surgery, because it could be an issue. Yeah, there's a lot of products out there promising, and I've seen regression. You're right, in the research studies, they were generally done on 1-year intervals, and just stopping it from getting worse compared to the population. The average population goes up. If you just blunt that, that's considered a win, and reversing it is very difficult to do. I think the friends I have, it took them 5 years of really disciplined effort. And also, I'll volunteer that I think plaque doesn't always calcify into a nugget. I've seen plaque become pliable. I've seen it flex with the artery. I've seen speckles of calcifications in it. And I think the body has an amazing ability to heal. Wow. All right, Doc, we wasted a full hour together talking about cardiovascular disease. I'm going to stop by your clinic next time I'm in town, and we're going to push this out to a lot of people. So thank you very much for your time here.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was awesome.
All right, man. Have a good weekend, and be well, everybody. Bye.